Onouchi from Chiba University, and
I'm Professor Jane Burns from the University of California in San Diego. So Yoshi, let's talk about the contribution of Kawasaki disease to translational medicine.
I think the cause of Kawasaki is quite mysterious. So we researchers and doctors need a clue to find the cause of Kawasaki. I think the genetic facts of the Kawasaki is very, very important because the incidence rates of Kawasaki is quite different between Asian and other ethnicities. So I think the genetic part is just a part of the whole etiology. So the elucidation of the genetic parts give us very, very important information about the whole etiology picture.
Absolutely. So I think that not only do the genetics inform us about what this disease is fundamentally, but even before we get to that very important piece, which is going to take more time and more funding and more work, it has already borne fruit in terms of translating into clinical trials. And in that way, I think Kawasaki disease is somewhat of a poster child for the use of genetics to really push a field forward in terms of care of patients right now. And you should probably talk about your discoveries of the importance of the calcium signaling pathway and where that's led us.
I found the single nucleotide polymorphism in the ITPKC genes confers susceptibility and patient's response to immunoglobulin therapy. So this gene function is very interesting to understand the pathogenesis of Kawasaki. So we found that the ITPKC plays a role in regulating the calcium signaling pathway. And one immunosuppressant, cyclosporine, suppresses the very pathway. So we imagine that cyclosporine is effective to Kawasaki, and many pediatricians in Japan have experienced to use cyclosporine to refractory Kawasaki cases. So we collaborated with them to try the efficacy of cyclosporine to refractory KD cases, and going to have a very good data.
Which will be presented at this meeting,
yes.
Right? Yeah. And also in the United States, of course, we're using cyclosporine, but all of that was really inspired by the initial genetic discoveries. And I think it's really important to point out that the data being presented here at this meeting also represents the fruition of many collaborations. And even the ITPKC data originally, which was discovered in a Japanese data set, was then validated in a US data set. And I think that that kind of collaboration across ethnicities, across research groups, is really going to be fundamental to, first of all, creating large enough data sets that we have the power, just in terms of samples, to answer these questions. But also to tease out what you brought out at the beginning, which is that there's an incredible difference in susceptibility across populations, with the Japanese having 1 out of every 85 children getting this disease, whereas we have much, much lower numbers in various parts of the world. So clearly that's going to have a genetic basis, if not accounting for all of the difference, at least accounting for an important part of it. So I think the collaboration so that we can study and tease out the Asian-specific susceptibilities versus the other groups is going to be really key.
Yeah, I think so too. we are now trying to find Asian-specific or common in Asian population genetic factors with Korean group and Taiwanese group. And this is important to find what is common in Asian groups. But trans-ethnic comparison is another important aspect of this kind of study. So if we compare the data between Asian groups and European groups, we can find what is different from Asian and European, and what is different. Perhaps we can find a clue to find out the difference of etiology between Asian and European groups.
I don't know that there's a difference in etiology, but definitely there's a difference in host response.
Genetic studies of Kawasaki find that there are substantial overlap of the genetic background between Kawasaki and other inflammatory diseases. This is very new finding because we have not used to imagine that Kawasaki is an autoimmune disease or inflammatory bowel diseases. We think that the mechanism of the disease is quite different from such diseases because, in fact, there are overlapping genetic factors. So this knowledge is very important to understand Kawasaki pathophysiology. So I think in the future, many overlap between Kawasaki and other diseases will be found, and at the same time we will find the very specific genetic factors for Kawasaki disease. So understanding the specific genetic factors is very important to understand Kawasaki, but understanding the overlapping of other diseases such as autoimmune disease or cardiovascular disease will facilitate to imagine the therapeutic measure which is applicable for Kawasaki. I think so.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right that we're not an island. So the things that we discover from Kawasaki disease really are going to have an impact across inflammatory cardiovascular diseases. I think we could include atherosclerosis in that. And other inflammatory diseases where we realize that there are only so many ways that the human body can respond. And these inflammatory pathways and the predisposition to having those pathways triggered is ultimately going to be shared among, I think, many other diseases. I'd like to bring out also another way that I think that Kawasaki disease genetics specifically has already contributed to therapy, and that's in the realm of the Tgf-Beta signaling pathways. So here again, Kawasaki disease genetics is leading us towards the idea that there's an aneurysm spectrum in terms of cardiovascular diseases, with Marfan's being the prototype Tgf-Beta aneurysm disease in a more non-inflammatory environment, with Kawasaki disease at the other end of the spectrum as being Tgf-Beta mediated or Tgf-Beta involved as an important pathway, but in a more inflammatory environment with the calcium signaling issues superimposed. So already that's led to a trial of statins, which has just been funded by the NIH to look at the acute therapy of Kawasaki disease with statins to try to interrupt the negative aspects of that Tgf-Beta signaling pathway. And people are looking at losartan or angiotensin receptor blockers and other strategies, but we need to go back and remember that that was really all inspired by the genetic studies.
Yes.
So anybody who thinks that genetics is irrelevant and hasn't played a big role already in where we're going with the cutting-edge research in this disease is mistaken. And I think this meeting has really brought out the important role that's been recognized by many groups now in many countries of how we can all work together to make genetics contribute to the ultimate goal of taking care of these children.
I agree with you.
Yeah.